Good day. We are grateful to have you here from the desk of the Executive Director of Back Bay Mission again. I am James. And I just wanted to share briefly this morning before I kind of get into the throes of what I want to share today. Holy Trinity Lutheran Church from Muncie, Indiana brought about 18 individuals here this week to do some work projects on our homes, our rehabs, and our builds to support Back Bay Mission. But they also gave $2,000 in memory of Carol Pickney, who actually had been down here to Back Bay Mission several times and was really, really very much a part of the community. And her pastor said she was one of those individuals that was the do-all person in the church that every community of faith wants to have. So really grateful to have Holy Trinity Lutheran Church here. And this morning, it's Thursday morning as we're filming, Kenny Washington and myself, our Director of Services over at the Micah Day Center, and I shared with them a bit about Back Bay Mission. I talked about my background, talked about our vision, and then Kenny talked a bit more about the programs that he supervises. And it was interesting. During the conversation, of course, we talked about our vision, we talked about who Back Bay is and who we're seeking to become, and this group has been here several times. There were some new folks. But what I really wanted to share today ties in very much, especially with the last part of our conversation. One of the individuals that was here from the church in Muncie, Indiana, said, so what's the status of Black Lives Matter down here on the coast? And what's the status of kind of the Black community? And it was really an interesting discussion because I've been trying to understand that from my perspective as a white male since I've been down here moving to the Deep South. And one of the authors of a book I've been recently reading talked about how Mississippi is really a microcosm for everything else in the country. Always has been, right? What's happened in Mississippi and Alabama around the civil rights movement, around women's movements, around movements for persons of color, even around immigration, is very much a microcosm of what's happening across the country. And to know Mississippi is to know the work of the civil rights movement and the work of civil rights in general, whether it's for homeless folks, whether it's for people experiencing challenges with having no health care, persons who are Black or brown or indigenous. The struggle here really informs the struggle of a nation. So today, I want to honor somebody who, it seems like during this pandemic, oh wow, passed away, it seems years ago, but it's just been relatively recent. In July of 17th in 2020 is when John Lewis passed away. And I'm going to share a little bit about John Lewis because it relates directly to the conversation we had with Holy Trinity Lutheran Church. It relates directly to many of the conversations that I have with staff, or I have especially with my Black brothers and sisters kind of along the coast here. And of course, he's best known for the statement, good trouble. And I asked myself, what is good trouble? And I ask you too, what is good trouble? And one of the individuals from Muncie said, I want to do something. What can I do? I want to be a voice for racial equity and justice. What can I do? Well, I have to say, few people you meet really rouse the very best in you, right? I'm sure you can name a few people that have really, really encouraged you to be your very best. They're kind of heroes, heroines. They're living history makers, possibly. Their words, their deeds have an incredible, thunderous impact on your soul. And Congressman John Robert Lewis was such a person for me. He said, get in good trouble, necessary trouble. I had an opportunity to sit several times across the dinner table, breakfast table, lunch table, to sit in the classroom with John Lewis. For several years in a row, of course, with the exception of this last couple of years because of COVID, I've attended the Mississippi Veterans of the Civil Rights Movement gathering in Jackson, Mississippi. It was held at Tougaloo College and Jackson State University. Both of these universities, colleges, were founded to serve primarily black students. And the beautiful thing about Tougaloo College is it was established in, I believe, about 1869 by our Congregationalist church, who were foremothers and forefathers of the United Church of Christ. And Tougaloo is still affiliated with the United Church of Christ because even way back in 1869, the United Church of Christ believed in racial equity and equality, and we continue to be a part of the change that we want to see in the world, helping to dismantle institutions and systems that continue, right, to keep people in poverty and inequity. Tougaloo College, just briefly take a little segue, has an amazing history. And it's been referred to oftentimes as, and I quote, the cradle of the civil rights movement in Mississippi. It played a really significant role in advancing the fundamental principles of equality, freedom, justice, and the American promise, right? That the dream is for everyone. So John says, get in good trouble, necessary trouble. There at Tougaloo, he said that at Jackson State so many times when I was sitting across the table from him or in small groups. Some of you may know John Lewis's story, some of you may not. He was the son of a sharecropper growing up in rural Alabama. And he said that as a little boy, he was in constant fear because of the signs that said, no colored boys, no colored girls, no colored people. His parents and his grandparents, by the way, were the ones who used to tell him, don't get into trouble. Don't get into trouble. But I think John was inspired by those words and turned them around and said, get in good trouble. And his activism was inspired by the Montgomery bus boycott that started when trained nonviolent activist Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat. That was his pivotal point when he said, I will become an activist in the spirit of Rosa Parks. In one of those conversations, I believe it was at breakfast actually, across the table from John Lewis, he said, James, Rosa Parks inspired us to get into trouble. And I've been getting into trouble ever since. She inspired us to find a way, to get in the way, to get in what I call good trouble, necessary trouble. Now, he coined that and turned that from his grandparents who told him not to get in trouble. Over the years, I think John Lewis continued to be inspired by Rosa Parks, who taught him about the philosophy and the discipline of nonviolent action and nonviolent speaking and nonviolent communication. She kept on saying to each one of us, he told me, you too can do something. And for people, if you see something that's not right, he told me one day, not fair, James, not just, do something. Open your mouth and act. He said we cannot afford to be silent and to be quiet. I think John Lewis followed her advice and shared Rosa's insights and his own additional insights many, many times with groups of young activists and aging activists at the Mississippi Veterans of the Civil Rights Movement gathering. And he inspired us all each and every time he did. He died, of course, at the incredibly young age of 80, because I think he was so young at 80 years old, so full of wisdom, and yet so full of expectation. Lewis told me how he was inspired by Rosa to write to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., actually. And he was given a round-trip bus ticket to meet him in Montgomery. And Dr. King, upon meeting this young activist, John called him and dubbed him the boy from Troy, Alabama. The one thing that I remember about John is that he shared not from a place of pride. He wasn't saying, hey, I did all this with my life. This is how far I've come. But he shared from a place of humility and humbleness. He risked his life time and time again by organizing voters and organizing voter registration drives and organizing sit-ins at lunch counters. John was beaten and arrested for challenging the injustice of Jim Crow segregation in the Deep South. While he was still a young man, John Lewis was already a nationally recognized leader and was named one of the big six leaders of the civil rights movement. He was also the chairman of SNCC, as it's lovingly called, with the acronyms, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. At the youthful age of 23, he was a keynote speaker at a historic march in Washington, D.C. in 1963. And don't let anybody ever tell you you're too young, example of John Lewis, or you're too old, example of John Lewis, who was an activist right into his 80th year. John Lewis began making trouble at the age of about 16, 17, and really didn't stop until he was 80 years old. I think one of the most amazing moments in the civil rights history was when John Lewis in 1965, March 7th, led more than 600 peaceful, nonviolent protesters across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama. I'd been to that place, to Selma, and I'd walked from Selma to Montgomery with a group of young people. They were demonstrating the need for voting rights in the state of Alabama. And of course, we know that it was called Bloody Sunday, right? When Alabama troopers brutally attacked those marchers. What's amazing about that is it continued to be that peaceful, non-violent protest, but speaking truth to power. And having visited there, there's a strange sacred energy at Selma Bridge. There's a strange sacred energy as you walk the footsteps, in the footsteps of those 600 people that walked from the Pettus Bridge to Montgomery. And you can sense the energy. You can sense the power. The one thing about John is he always stuck to Rosa's advice to never be quiet, but to continue to get into good trouble. And do it through nonviolence, through nonviolent communication, through nonviolent action. As I remember the meal conversations with John, he had a generous spirit that touched everyone he met. He had a gentle temperament that would put you at ease, even though you knew you were in the presence of greatness, right? In the presence of a man who knew what he believed, who knew who he was, and lived into his true best self. Last time I heard John speak was November 20th, 2019. He actually sent me a copy of his speech. He celebrated the AIDS Memorial Quilt Collection arriving at the Library of Congress. His message was peaceful. His message was full of resolve, perseverance, and care for those still living with HIV and AIDS, and those who were affected by those living with HIV and AIDS. John said these powerful words, and I quote, and I honestly think these are some of the most powerful words I'd ever heard John speak. He said this. I'm going to read these so I get them right. In the height of the civil rights movement, he said, we spoke of love. On one occasion, Dr. King said to some of us, just love everybody. Love them who fail to love you. Just love. And then MLK said, just love a little hell out of everybody. Just love a little hell out of everybody. Isn't that the truth? And isn't that the most beautiful truth? And the most beautiful gift we have to share is love. And loving the hell out of those who don't love you, and loving the hell out of those who don't love you back. That is so difficult. in our polarized world in which we live. And that's something that I heard Kenny say today and share today. And I heard all of our case managers share with this group of wonderful Lutherans from Muncie, Indiana, who are here to share their love through their hands, through their feet, through their hearts. Is that that's what Back Bay Micah Center is all about for people who are unsheltered, for individuals and families, is they just walk in there and they really want our friends who are unsheltered to feel love, in a world that doesn't share a lot of love, with people experiencing homelessness or panhandling on the streets or sleeping in their cars. So today at Back Bay Mission, I want to celebrate this great warrior and this fighter of injustice, John, as we get closer to the anniversary of his passing. And I'm hoping that in the future, Back Bay Mission can get into some really, really good trouble. And I hope that you can make some good trouble wherever you're at as we arise out of the season of the pandemic. You can make good trouble in loud and quiet ways. You can make good trouble if you're 8 years old or you're 98 years old. You can make good trouble with your personality, exactly with who you are. For some, it may simply be to send an email or a letter to your elected officials. For others, as I've done in the past, it's laying down in front of an ICE bus, taking a group of migrants to a detention center, or chaining yourself to a home that's about to be foreclosed on because you know that family's going to be put on the streets. Part of my vision for Back Bay Mission is that we would continue to make some good trouble, necessary trouble, advocating for the systems that keep people in poverty, that keep people unsheltered, that keep people without a home, that keep people in their place. Because whether we believe it or not, as one of my favorite authors, Bell Hooks, says, it's really not about race, it's really about class, that we very much have a class system here in the United States. So make some good trouble wherever you're at. Maybe just raise your voice, maybe send an email. Speak your truth and speak your truth to power. Make some good trouble for justice and equity. And let us remember John's story, right? Individuals upon whose shoulders we stand. Upon whose shoulders? I stand on the shoulders of the previous executive directors here, especially Alice, as Alice and I have formed a relationship and we'll be doing some work in the community about racism and dismantling racism. Let's stand on their shoulders and continue to make really good trouble, really necessary trouble, to continue to shake up the systems and continue to shake up hearts and minds so that we can live equitably and justly together as human beings. And so today I encourage you to share this with others. Send this video out to encourage others to make some good trouble. I encourage you to watch our other conversations, right, that some of our staff are sharing on Wednesday. I also encourage you, if you're able, to write a check, to send us a note of gratitude. Sometimes those are better than any check you can send. And let us know that you continue to support us making good trouble, making necessary trouble here on the coast of Mississippi. So thanks for joining me, and we hope to hear from you soon.